So I want you to just take a second and imagine holding your smartphone in your hand. Like, really think about it.
Right, just the physical object.
Yeah, exactly. The glass, the metal. We tap on these things all day, every single day. But we almost never think about the massive, invisible corporate machinery that it takes to actually put that specific device into your pocket.
Oh, it's mind-boggling. You're talking about global supply chains, secret design labs, silicon foundries, and, literally trillions of dollars moving in perfect synchronization.
Right. And today, that massive machinery is going through its biggest, most fundamental shift in 15 years.
It really is the end of an era.
It is, because in April 2026, Apple dropped a monumental announcement. Come September 1st, Tim Cook is stepping down as CEO.
And he's handing the reins over to John Ternus.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to tear into this massive, really comprehensive piece of reporting from Medusa. We're going to look back at Cook's 15-year masterclass in logistics and then forecast what the future actually looks like under Ternus.
Because Ternus is, a pure engineer, which is a huge pivot.
A massive pivot. We're framing this as a case study in leadership evolution. You have the founder, Steve Jobs, then the logistics mastermind, Tim Cook, and now the engineer.
It's a fascinating progression, but to really understand where the new CEO is taking the company, we have to look at the foundation he's inheriting.
Right, the house that Cook built.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, the architect of that foundation, Tim Cook, his origin story is so counterintuitive.
It really is. The Medusa piece winds the clock way back, right, like all the way to 1982.
Yeah, 1982. He graduates from Auburn University, and his degree is in industrial engineering.
Which immediately sets the stage. He's not a designer.
Not at all. He's an operations guy from day one. So he spends 12 years at IBM.
12 years. That's a long stint.
It is. He climbs the ranks, learns the ropes of massive corporate structures. Then he does a short stint as chief operating officer at Intelligent Electronics.
Okay, building up the resume.
Right. But then he lands this massive, highly coveted role at Compaq. He becomes their vice president of corporate materials.
Now, for anyone who doesn't remember the late 90s, Compaq was basically the apex predator of the PC world back then.
Oh, they were giants. Being the VP of corporate materials there meant you had reached the absolute pinnacle of predictability. You were running a very well-oiled machine.
A very safe, lucrative machine.
Exactly. But he only stayed at Compaq for 6 months.
Wait, really? Just 6 months?
Just 6 months. Because in March 1998, he makes this wild pivot. He abandons that totally secure fortress to join Apple as the senior vice president of worldwide operations.
And we have to paint a picture of Apple in early 1998 here, because they were not the $4 trillion behemoth we know today.
Oh, God, no. They were bleeding cash at an alarming rate.
Like hemorrhaging money.
The industry consensus was literally that Apple was a dead man walking.
Oh.
I mean, Michael Dell famously said that if he were running Apple, he would just shut it down and give whatever money was left back to the shareholders.
Ouch. I mean, that is brutal, but it was the reality. Steve Jobs had just returned a few months prior, trying to bail out a ship that was pretty much underwater.
Right. So why does a guy who specializes in eliminating risk join a sinking ship?
And there's this great detail from the source. It brings up a commencement speech Cook gave at Auburn University in 2010. He literally stands up in front of the graduating class and admits that taking the Apple job defied all logic.
Yeah, he said his left brain, his highly analytical industrial engineering brain, was screaming at him to just stay at Compaq.
Because logically it made zero sense.
None. His entire professional identity was built on forecasting outcomes and reducing variables. But he threw it all out for pure intuition.
Which is wild for an operations guy.
He said in that speech that he took the job after a single 5-minute interview with Steve Jobs.
5 minutes? What happens in 5 minutes?
Well, he sensed this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to resurrect a great American company and to do it alongside a creative genius.
And I think that highlights this hidden visionary trait in Cook. Like, we always reserve the word visionary for the hardware designers or the software coders.
Right, the creatives.
But Cook saw the potential in the underlying machinery of the company. He didn't save Apple by sketching out the iMac on a napkin.
No, not at all. He saved it by completely rewiring how they manufactured and moved those objects.
Which brings us to my favorite part of the article. He jokingly called himself the Attila of inventory.
Such a great nickname.
It's so intense. I love thinking about this dynamic between Jobs and Cook. It's like, okay, think of early Apple as a brilliant but totally chaotic chef.
Okay, I like this.
Jobs is the chef who keeps burning down the kitchen because he's experimenting so much. But Cook is the ruthless restaurant manager. He's the guy making sure the exact number of ripe tomatoes arrives every single morning so they don't waste a dime.
That is the perfect analogy. Jobs was the visionary architect drawing impossible, gravity-defying buildings, but he desperately needed a general contractor to actually build them without going bankrupt.
And Cook was that general contractor.
He was. And we should really look at how he actually did that. Like, what did the Attila of inventory do in those early days?
Yeah, let's unpack that because people say supply chain mastery all the time, but what does it actually mean?
Well, he brought in extreme just-in-time manufacturing principles.
Okay, just in time, meaning what, practically?
So before Cook, Apple operated like a clunky legacy hardware company. They would build huge batches of computers and just let them sit in warehouses for over a month.
Just sitting there hoping people buy them.
Exactly. But in the tech industry, inventory is fundamentally depreciation. A computer sitting in a box for 30 days is losing value every single second because some competitor is already building a faster component.
Right, it's not wine, it doesn't get better with age. Tech inventory rots like fresh fruit.
That's exactly how Cook saw it. He looked at those warehouses like refrigerators full of expiring milk. So he shut down Apple's own factories.
He just closed them.
Shut them down and outsourced the manufacturing to specialists in Asia. He reduced the amount of time inventory sat around from a bloated 30 days down to an unheard of 6 days.
Wow, from 30 days to 6. That frees up so much cash.
An immense amount of cash. He realized that the faster you get a component out of a factory and into a consumer's hands, the higher your profit margin. But then he did something even more aggressive.
What's that?
He weaponized that newly freed up cash.
Weaponized it. How do you weaponize cash in
He
logistics?
started prepaying suppliers, billions of dollars up front.
Or to lock them in.
Exactly. To secure exclusive rights to the best manufacturing equipment. If a new, highly precise CNC milling machine was invented, Cook would just buy up all the global capacity.
So competitors literally couldn't buy the machines to make their own products.
Right. They couldn't build a device to rival an iPhone or a MacBook because Apple legally owned the time on the machines required to make them.
That is just, it's a complete chokehold on the industry. It's
Yeah.
brilliant, but it's ruthless.
Very ruthless. And when you look at the results of that extreme efficiency over his 15 years as CEO, the math is just staggering.
Let's hear the numbers.
When he officially took the reins in 2011, Apple's market capitalization, the total value of all its shares, was around $350 billion.
Which is massive in its own right.
It is. But today, as he prepares to exit in 2026, it's $4 trillion.
$4 trillion. I mean, the human brain really struggles to comprehend that scale. If Apple were an independent nation, its economy would be larger than the UK's.
It's unfathomable. And that unyielding focus on operations didn't just inflate the value, it created an unparalleled shield.
A shield against the usual tech volatility, right?
Right.
Because consumer trends flip overnight. But Cook's supply chain kept them insulated.
Precisely. He built the most valuable financial fortress in human history.
But, and this is where the Medusa piece gets really interesting, building an impenetrable fortress comes with a hidden cost.
It does, a very steep one.
When your entire corporate nervous system is optimized for protecting a $4 trillion golden goose, your muscle for taking wild, unpredictable swings starts to atrophy.
Right. And that leads directly into the core pushback against Cook's era. The main criticism is that he transformed this revolutionary Silicon Valley pirate ship into the world's most predictable financial giant.
And, you know, shareholders love a predictable giant.
They adore it. But the trade-off for that financial stability was a dramatic slowing of world-changing innovation.
You can see it in the product lineup. If you look at the defining products released entirely under Cook's watch, what do we have? The Apple Watch and AirPods.
Right. Hugely successful products.
Absolutely. Incredible feats of miniaturization. They dominate their categories and make tens of billions of dollars. But are they paradigm shifts?
Most tech historians say no.
Right. They didn't reorganize human behavior the way the original iPhone did.
They're brilliant accessories to the core product. They were optimizations of an existing ecosystem, not a new frontier.
And when Apple did try to force a new frontier under Cook, we saw some serious friction. The source material points explicitly to the Apple Vision Pro.
Yes. which it categorizes point blank as a failed mixed reality headset.
Just to clarify for you listening, mixed reality is that tech where you wear a headset and it overlays digital interfaces onto your physical room, like a mix of virtual and augmented reality.
Right, and Apple poured billions into this, yet it didn't even resonate with their most hardcore early adopters.
Why do you think that is, based on the analysis, I mean?
The Vision Pro is the ultimate example of a logistics-first company trying to artificially manufacture a revolution. They built an incredibly complex, beautifully manufactured piece of hardware, but they fundamentally misjudged if the market actually wanted it.
They built the perfect product for a problem nobody had.
Exactly. But honestly, the real casualty of this risk-averse era wasn't the headset.
It was artificial intelligence.
Yes, the AI gap. The Medusa piece hammers on this point. It highlights AI as the most glaring strategic misstep of the decade for Apple.
Because they entered the generative AI race shockingly late.
So late. We are talking about the richest company on earth, and they have to rely on external partners, even direct competitors like Google, to provide the underlying AI models for their devices.
Wait, I want to pause on that, because it's a massive contradiction. How does the most resourced company on the planet get beaten to the punch on the biggest technological shift of our generation?
2 words. Innovator's dilemma.
Okay, unpack that for me.
AI software development is inherently messy. It requires massive, speculative investments with no guarantee of a tangible product. You can't just put an AI model in a box and sell it immediately.
Right, it's not a physical thing you can hold.
And you have to move fast, you have to release flawed products, let the public break them, and use that data to train the models.
Oh, and Tim Cook's Apple is culturally allergic to releasing anything messy or flawed.
Exactly. Their entire supply chain is built around releasing a perfectly polished, highly predictable hardware iteration every single September.
So the very DNA that made them worth $4 trillion is exactly what held them back in the AI race. The hardware logistics model just doesn't map onto the chaotic software iteration that AI needs.
It really doesn't.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. If Cook's main unwritten assignment from Steve Jobs was to just ensure the survival and financial dominance of the company, didn't he do a flawless job?
He absolutely did.
Like, are we essentially criticizing him for winning the game of capitalism too well?
That is the ultimate paradox of the Cook era. He delivered exactly what the stock market demanded, flawlessly, for 15 straight years. But the tech industry doesn't grant immunity based on past performance.
It only grades on the future.
Right. And the next chapter of computing, where AI is the invisible tissue connecting everything, requires a company willing to disrupt its own successful business models.
It requires a company willing to cannibalize its own profits to build the next big thing. Just terrifying when you're worth $4 trillion.
Very terrifying.
Yeah.
So Cook built this impenetrable fortress. But the war moved to a completely different battlefield.
And now the fortress needs to turn into a nimble strike force again.
Exactly. Which brings us to the succession race. Apple had to find a leader who wasn't just a younger clone of Tim Cook.
Right. Recognizing this need for a new horizon, how did they actually choose the next leader? Because they had a pool of highly qualified veterans.
And this transition wasn't some sudden panic move. The Financial Times was reporting on this highly orchestrated succession plan back in November 2025.
So they were planning this well in advance.
Yes, they had a deep bench of highly visible senior executives to choose from.
Let's run down that list,
Yeah.
because it's fascinating to see who actually got passed over.
The early heir apparent was Jeff Williams. He's the chief operating officer.
Which is essentially the exact job Tim Cook held before he became CEO.
Exactly. But Bloomberg reported in May 2024 that his age was a critical roadblock. He's only a couple of years younger than Cook.
Ah, so not a long-term solution.
Right. And by July 2025, Williams had exited Apple entirely.
Wow, so that just fundamentally resets the chessboard.
It did. By late 2025, the Wall Street Journal reported the race was down to a handful of heavyweights.
Who was left?
You had Eddie Q, the senior VP of Internet Services. He's the guy who built Apple Music and iCloud.
Huge parts of the ecosystem.
Then you had Greg Joswiak, the senior VP of Marketing, and Craig Federighi, the senior VP of Software Engineering.
Federighi is the face most listeners would probably recognize. He's the guy with the great hair who always enthusiastically sprints out of the darkness during their product keynotes.
He's incredibly charismatic.
Yeah.
Beloved by the developer community.
But the board passed over all of them to crown John Ternus.
They did. And the primary differentiator, aside from his very specific skill set, was age. John Ternus is 50 years old.
Which is such a fascinating data point because think about legacy industries, banking, oil, traditional manufacturing. If a 50-year-old takes over as CEO, nobody blinks an eye.
It's standard operating procedure.
Right. But in the context of taking over a $4 trillion tech giant, 50 represents a radical generational shift.
Well, when you're building massive hardware pipelines or developing custom silicon chips or trying to pioneer new AI paradigms, you are working on 10 to 15-year timelines.
So you need someone who will actually be around to see the end of that timeline.
Exactly. Apple wasn't looking for a caretaker to just manage the stock price for 3 years. They needed someone who could establish a unified vision and be in the seat long enough to see those decade-long bets come to fruition.
But here's the flip side of that youthful pivot. Ternus has been working at Apple since 2001. That is 25 years.
Half his life.
He spent half of his life inside the walls of Cupertino. So the obvious question here is, does handing the keys to an ultimate insider actually give the company the fresh, disruptive perspective it needs? Or does it just guarantee another decade of the exact same Apple orthodoxy, just in a younger package?
That is the defining tension of this new era. To determine if he's capable of true disruption, we have to examine his DNA as a creator.
Let's do that, because his DNA is vastly different from Jobs the designer or Cook the logistics master.
Right. John Ternus is, down to his marrow, an engineer.
So let's dig into that resume. He graduates from the University of Pennsylvania, right?
Yes, with a degree in mechanical engineering.
Okay, mechanical engineering. And there's this one detail from his early career that the article mentions, which feels incredibly relevant today.
Oh, the VR company.
Yes. Before he ever badged into an Apple building, he spent 4 years in the late 1990s working at a company called Virtual Research Systems.
They were building virtual reality equipment in an era where VR was basically science fiction.
I mean, in the 90s, we're talking massive clunky helmets, terrible low-resolution screens, extreme lag.
Yeah, he was banging his head against spatial computing problems 3 decades before the Vision Pro ever existed.
That is wild to think about. So then he joins Apple's product design team in 2001.
Right. He cuts his teeth designing external computer monitors. Then he plays a massive role in the physical design of the very first iPad.
A hugely defining product.
But the absolute crown jewel of his tenure, the thing that truly elevated him in the eyes of the board, was co-leading the transition to Apple Silicon.
Okay, we need to pause and explain this because this cannot be overstated. For the listener, the Apple Silicon transition was one of the most audacious, high-wire technical feats in modern computing history.
It really was. For years, Apple relied on Intel to make the central processors for their Mac computers.
They were essentially passengers on Intel's train.
Exactly. If Intel struggled to make a faster, more heat-efficient chip, Apple's laptops just stagnated.
So Ternus helped them build their own train tracks.
He co-led the effort to ditch Intel entirely. They transitioned the entire Mac lineup to chips designed in-house, based on ARM architecture.
Which means they integrated the CPU, the graphics processor, and the memory all onto one single piece of silicon.
And the risk there was astronomical. If it failed, the entire Mac division would have essentially collapsed.
But it was a massive triumph.
A total triumph. The power and efficiency gains were just mind-blowing. Suddenly, you had a fanless laptop outperforming massive desktop towers.
And his success there expanded his portfolio massively, right?
The Medusa piece details how he eventually took command of both the hardware and software design teams.
Bridging the gap.
He became the central nervous system connecting the engineers in the labs to the executives in the boardroom. He's highly influential. He's writing presentation scripts. He's personally editing website text.
He's getting his hands dirty in marketing.
And just recently, he was the executive dispatched to New York to unveil the highly anticipated budget laptop, the MacBook Neo.
While Tim Cook stayed home.
Exactly. That New York presentation was basically the unofficial coronation.
And when the official CEO announcement finally dropped, Tim Cook released a very telling statement. He described Ternus as having the mind of an engineer, soul of an innovator.
Which forces us to ask,
Yeah.
What does a purely engineering-led Apple actually look like?
It has to look radically different from a logistics-led Apple.
The expectation is a total realignment of priorities. Under Cook, the defining quota of a new product was often, how can we source components to manufacture 100 million units of this with maximum profit margins?
Right, a supply chain question.
But under an engineering-led philosophy, the primary question becomes, what is the absolute physical limit of what this hardware can achieve?
So Ternus is expected to empower the engineering teams to push past established constraints.
rather than letting the procurement or finance teams dictate what is safely possible.
Let's go back to our construction analogy. If Jobs was the visionary architect drawing impossible buildings and Cook was the general contractor making sure it got built on budget, what does that make John Ternus?
He is the ultimate structural engineer. He understands the fundamental physics of the materials better than anyone alive.
He knows exactly how much weight the beams can hold.
And he knows how to integrate the steel and the glass, the hardware and the software flawlessly.
But here is the existential question for a $4 trillion company. Does the structural engineer actually know what kind of building to draw next?
And the source text does not pull its punches here.
No, it doesn't. It points out that Ternus is heavily associated with the exact products that critics label good but boring.
He led the engineering on the incremental Apple Watch updates. He led the AirPods.
And most concerningly, he was deeply involved in the engineering of the struggling Vision Pro.
Right. This highlights the vast chasm between invention and optimization. Being a world-class engineer means you are uniquely gifted at executing ideas that already exist.
But it doesn't automatically mean you possess the chaotic, intuitive spark required to invent a product category out of thin air.
Exactly. Can an engineer inspire entirely new product categories? The Medusa article concludes by stating, it is entirely unknown if Ternus possesses the vision required to navigate the AI revolution.
We don't have to worry about the technical quality of the hardware. Like, the next 5 years of Apple devices are going to be beautifully engineered, insanely fast, and incredibly reliable.
Unquestionably.
But will they be revolutionary? Will he build a device that defines the AI era the way the iPhone defined the mobile internet era?
That is the question that will define the next decade of technology.
And I think that brings us to the core insights you, the listener, should really take away from this transition.
To summarize it, Tim Cook's era will be remembered and studied in business schools forever as a masterclass in operational efficiency and financial scaling.
He inherited a brilliant but erratic startup and forged it into an unstoppable juggernaut. He provided unparalleled stability.
But at the cost of the wild swings that create the future, he left a gap in true innovation.
Right. And now, John Ternus is stepping into the arena. He's the engineer tasked with pushing the technical boundaries, all while carrying the immense crushing weight of a $4 trillion legacy.
So the next time you buy a piece of tech, really think about the philosophy behind it.
Yes. Ask yourself, is it designed to be a safe, profitable iteration the Cook way? Or is it an engineering marvel pushing hardware limits, the Ternus promise?
The invisible machinery behind the screen has fundamentally changed its operating system. And very soon, you will feel that change in the palm of your hand.
You absolutely will. And before we wrap this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on, something you can explore on your own.
It goes back to that early resume detail.
Yes. Think back to John Ternus spending 4 years in the 1990s trying to build virtual reality headsets. Fast forward 30 years, and he is taking control of Apple just months after their own massive, multi-billion-dollar bet on mixed reality. The Vision Pro has been widely rejected by the market.
It's a poetic collision of his past and the company's present.
It really is. As he settles into the CEO chair, how does a hardware engineer with deep roots in 90s VR handle that failure? Will his legacy be quietly killing Apple's mixed reality dream to focus entirely on the AI war and devices like the MacBook Neo? Or will he use his deep VR roots to finally crack the code that eluded even Tim Cook and make virtual reality Apple's next true revolution? Think about it.